very warm welcome to Saurabh for for joining this session, for gracing us, Saurabh. Thank you so much for taking the time, and for Puneet obviously hosting it. I'm really looking forward to the session. I'm Amit Gupta, and a big warm welcome to all the charter members from various chapters, as well as, of course, our own charter members in Singapore. Very, very warm welcome. Look forward to a really, really interesting discussion. So just the background context of this, Saurabh and I, when we were speaking, was it in December, early December, Saurabh, and we were talking, and I had a lot of questions around TiE and the India Angel Network and all the journey all the learnings that I thought we could leverage for TiE. And as I had that conversation, I think we spoke for an hour and a half, Saurabh, and I thought, it's not fair. I think that story needs to be replayed with our members, and they need to understand the backstory of TiE. And then I thought, hey, I spoke to Puneet and I said, who better to host than that Puneet, who's been very formative in obviously building TiE Singapore to where it is today, but also been very closely involved with TiE throughout the journey, and as having been a global trustee for TiE as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to this discussion. Neither of you actually require an introduction within TiE, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't do a quick introduction. Saurabh, I don't think you require much of an introduction at all. I will leave to Puneet to do the justice to it. It took me an entire fireside chat with Puneet. I think that was an hour and a half, Puneet, that we did to capture your story. So I think we'll use this fireside chat more as an intro for Saurabh. But I will just say that we're really privileged to have Saurabh, in our, be one of the key figureheads of the TiE community as a co-founder of TiE. Saurabh is a Padma Shri from India, one of the highest civilian awards. And he has not only co-founded TiE, Saurabh has actually been very instrumental in shaping the tech and entrepreneur ecosystem, having co-founded NASSCOM and the India Angels Network. So lots to hear about there, Saurabh. So I'll leave that bit to Puneet. So let me now introduce Puneet Pushkarna. I think everyone knows Puneet as well on the call. It's the wrong forum if you don't know Puneet, but but I still have to capture some of the elements because Puneet doesn't do justice to his own introduction. He's very, very humble. But Puneet is a true blue Silicon Valley entrepreneur who's made his way to Singapore, like a lot of people do when they make a whole pile of cash. They have to find ways to get to a nice place like Singapore. So
you're making an assumption.
So says the man who at one point had bought a bank in the US because he could. So Puneet, you're very grounded and humble. We know that. But you've been an entrepreneur yourself. You're an investor. You're a philanthropist. As part of Puneet's journey, he started his journey in Silicon Valley. In the US, big part of his journey involved setting up HCL Americas as we know it, and that transformed HCL to where it is. Puneet has co-founded a number of companies. One, and as I mentioned, there was a bank somewhere in between because they thought might as well keep all that cash in a place that you own yourself. Wasn't a very smart idea, Puneet. I think you eventually did get rid of the bank. Probably too much hassle to manage that. But Puneet was also co-founder and president of Headstrong, which was sold to Genpact. And after that, he set up a private equity fund along with his co-founders called Solmark, which is really focused on large global tech product companies that are scaling up. So there's a wonderful part of your journey, Puneet, that we've already captured in that fireside chat. If anyone is interested in capturing that fireside chat or viewing it, send me a note or send Sudha a message and we'll share the link. But I think it is on the TiE Singapore YouTube channel, so you can watch it there. It's very, very entertaining and interesting. You've definitely lived a very colorful life, Puneet, and you continue to make our life a lot richer being part of TiE Singapore. So thank you for that. So, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. I think you've had a lot to do with shaping the TiE ecosystem. And obviously you've been a lot closer to the journey, having followed that with Saurabh. So I will now hand it over to you and look forward to listening in.
Thank you, Amit. I'm very privileged. I learned from the best like Saurabh, so I could do whatever I could little bit in TiE because, ultimately mentorship and guidance is extremely important. But Saurabh, welcome once again. Really, it's extreme privilege to have you here. I feel I'm very privileged. I feel very lucky that we've had the opportunity to engage and interact. And while some of my friends here who are on this show with us may have seen you, but you have such a rich background and such a varied background that what I wanted to do was really just spend the next 55 minutes or so taking your life, and juxtaposing that in terms of how actually an industry evolution has happened and multiple things that have happened. I was trying to figure out how I introduce you, and it's such a hard thing to do, to introduce a man with so many facets. But clearly, from IIT, for those of you who don't know, Saurabh did his undergrad from IIT Kanpur. He went to Harvard Business School. After graduating from Harvard, he joined the corporate world, was with IBM in the US, then came to India, then he headed Tata Unisys over here. So that was his corporate part of the world. Then he jumped into entrepreneurship. And in entrepreneurship, he actually did some very pivotal things there. And I'll touch upon briefly, but I actually do want to dwell more into that because I think they have done foundational shifts to how we think and how we have evolved, where he set up NASSCOM, as you know, and that today is the epic body of the IT industry. IT industry itself today has put Indians in many ways on the global map, so to speak. He also set up, one of the first large venture funds called Infinity Ventures. And you may or may not know about Infinity Ventures, but two very visible brands of Infinity Ventures are Aventus and India Bulls. So Infinity Ventures was behind these two large brands. There were many other brands, but I'm just taking a few of those. And then, of course, he continues to sit on a number of boards, whether it's SEBI, whether it's the software technology parks, whether it's the Telecom Center of Excellence, the railway boards and all that. So there's a number of those things that he has done. But today, really where he's spending a disproportionate amount of time is really around, institution building around entrepreneurship. And this ties very closely to TiE as well. He built the largest angel networks called the India Angel Networks, where there are over 500 investors. They've invested into over 200 portfolio companies. They have now actually set up another fund, and Saurabh has been responsible for in doing that. He also, of course, gives a lot of time to educational institutes. He sits formally on the board of the Imperial College of the Business School, the Imperial College in London. He's also the board of governors of IIT Kanpur. And of course, as Amit mentioned and started this conversation, it's not every day that you get to meet a Padma Shri. Saurabh is a Padma Shri awardee, but he also actually got the DataQuest Lifetime Award. He was also awarded, by Prime Minister Modi and the IT Industry Award. So there are many aspects of that. And Saurabh, maybe I will start off by, I was thinking about that, how your journey has happened. And perhaps if you can just give a little bit of how you transited from being in a successful corporate world to then becoming an entrepreneur. So that first transition from being a corporate person to becoming an entrepreneur. And many of us here as TiE ecosystem, that's what we do. We foster entrepreneurship. They are going through that journey or are successfully transitioned that. They want to know how you did that. So welcome to the show, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Puneet and Amit, for having me here, for inviting me here. It's a great privilege and honor for me too. I feel very close to TiE Singapore. I was there when it started. And we're talking about an area that's obviously of great interest, entrepreneurship. So thank you very much for having me here. So to your question, we all, as we grow up, we all have goals and ambitions. And the problem is every time you sort of get lucky and achieve it, then you say, okay, so what next am I going to do? Because generally in life, most things aren't as great as they're cracked up to be. They look very good when you're not there, not as great when you're there. So it was an ambition, yes, from IIT to go to Harvard, join IBM, those were all ambitions. But when I was running Tata Unisys, it was a lot of fun. I mean, we're talking now of the 1980s. We had 11 overseas offices and all the rest. But corporations like that also are very hard to manage the politics. You know, a 50-50 joint venture between Unisys Corporation and Tata's, and you're sitting in the middle trying to manage both sides of it. And after a while, I felt, hey, you know, maybe I can do this better. Or at least do it in a way that I enjoy it more. That I'm spending all my time on building the company rather than managing, you know, different types of situations. And so that's the shift. And the other part also was that in those days, Tata Unisys was 1/3 of the Indian IT industry. The other 40% was TCS. Infosys was about $500,000 in revenue. It was not a big industry. This sounds grand till I tell you that the whole industry was just at that time, $50 million. And I said to myself, hey, listen, you know, am I going to be doing this for the next 20 years, the same job? Because where else would I go? You can't move from Tata Unisys to TCS. Infosys wasn't hiring. They had just started the company. You know, so the only way if you wanted to evolve was to actually step out and do it yourself. So that's how the entrepreneurial journey actually started.
And it was a very successful entrepreneur. I mean, it was a very successful journey for you. If I have to measure it just purely in financial numbers, you know, you set up IIS Infotech, you saw it then get acquired very successfully with Xansa. You continued to be the executive chairman of Xansa, took it public, then took a listed company and then went through an M&A through Styria. And if I recall, you know, at the time, you know, these days people talk about unicorns and $1 billion very easily and they throw them around very easily. But those days, an $800 million business was, you know, a huge amount of money. So it was a very, very successful journey that you this thing. So then when you did that, and then you were there you were there for a while, Saurabh.
Yeah, that was a long innings. I think that was over a decade there. And so we were lucky, actually, it worked out very well. And what I did do after that is actually then did another one, which was in scientific computing. Although this time I wasn't the executive chairman or CEO. We got somebody out of Schlumberger to do it and sort of did backseat driving. And then that went well too. And we got a very nice exit with SAIC in the US. And then we did another one in, so basically after about the third one, it started to not be so much fun. Because, you know, I mean, when IIS Infotech was 100 people, I really loved it. You knew everybody, we were having fun. We would do company offsites with families. When you get to several thousand, then it's like one more Tata Unisys. So then there is not as much fun. So I just found I loved the creation part, something out of nothing, the big deals, the M&A. I really didn't enjoy the day-to-day operations.
But what was interesting, Saurabh, is that while you were so busy, you know, running a startup and scaling it and, you know, dealing with everything and really, you know, for a very long period of time, I always say that from janitor to chairman, you're everybody, you know, all your problems are yours. Yet you give so much, particularly to entrepreneurship. And for that, you know, we have immense gratitude because this is where, you know, while you were doing this, simultaneously, you were also doing institution building around newer things. So two things that I do want to pick up today, which is, I think, germane to our audience here as well. One, when you thought about it, the IT industry was very, very nascent. I mean, it hardly existed, so to speak. You're the father, one of the fathers of the IT industry. You set it up and all that. You could have easily gone into something else. You had a degree from Harvard University, amongst the best universities in the world, the best brand recognition there. Going into the IT industry, building it up, and then building institutions around that, that takes a lot of effort and time. And NASSCOM came around that time. And really what you were doing was not just for yourself, but for the entire industry as a whole at one end. So that journey that I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that. And then simultaneously, you were involved in the setup of TiE. So you, Kanwal, and a whole lot of people, had the idea of TiE, then you wanted to propagate that take it from Silicon Valley, and you brought it around. So there are two different threads, and I'd like to kind of go down those paths, separately, so that I don't want to shortchange our audience here. I'd love to hear more about that, because on the TiE part, one thing that Amit also alluded to, and not too many people might know here, is that you were the one who actually set up TiE Singapore. Because I know when I spoke to Karan Singh Thakral and Indrajit, they talked to me and said, hey, Saurabh came, interviewed us, talked to us and said, are you guys good enough to set up TiE or not? And this is the idea, and we'd like to bring it here. But let me just park that for a second. I'll come back. But how about the NASSCOM story? How about that? And how did you set it up?
So Puneet, what happened was that we could see, those of us started out at Tata Unisys, for example, I could see that this was a sweet spot for us, for Indians. I mean, we were as good as anybody else. Our costs were very substantially lower at that time. And we could see that this business could scale rapidly. I mean, at Tata Unisys, we could, as fast as we wanted, we could grow. Very high margins. We could see this as a big business. But we had terrible policies at the time. You're running a global business, but when you go overseas, you can only carry $8 with you. The telephone lines, they almost never worked. So if I had to call from Bombay to my office in Delhi, if I didn't dial before 6:30, I couldn't connect till 11 o'clock. So it was a terrible environment. And we were trying to get government to say, look, this has great potential, listen to me. But as an individual company, they were not very interested. So we got together, four of us, and we said, look, I think we would need to create an industry body. And then they'll talk to us. And that's how the idea of NASSCOM was born. Now, it was very difficult because we were creating NASSCOM exactly at the same time that I was creating my startup. And my partner and very good friend, Mohit Goyal, would tell me often, saying, Saurabh, we have enough for our hands trying to get this company going. And here you are disappearing for days on this stupid NASSCOM stuff. Just cool it. Let somebody else do it. Let's just build a company. And that was true not just only of me. I mean, all the other guys who were doing it, except for, you might say, the TCS. Because I started doing NASSCOM just around the time I switched from Tata Unisys to doing my own startup.
Correct.
But we knew that actually, unless we created this body, we wouldn't get it off the ground. It's another matter, Puneet, I should tell you, that what was our vision? We thought if we did a lot of things right, one day this could be $1 billion industry. That's as big as we could think. We were $50 million. Last year, we crossed 250 billion. Now we're looking at 350 billion. But at that time, that's as big as we could think. That's what we were telling government. They look, don't look at us as 50 million. Hey, it's $1 billion industry. So that's what happened with NASSCOM. And it was very important. As it turns out, this was a very, very seminal thing to do. At that time, Philippines was bigger than us in this industry. Ireland was bigger, Israel, everybody was bigger. we passed all of them. And I think the one thing that was really responsible was NASSCOM, because it did one more thing. It allowed us to get government to kind of create the enabling policy framework we needed. It allowed us to gang together and build a brand overseas. So we were all very small companies. We would get together, 20 of us. We would go to the US and hold these seminars, which we called Software India seminars, try and get a lot of people and pitch as a group, because individually, nobody was give us the time of day. Like I said, all our companies were doing 50,000, 100,000 in revenues. And it brought us very close together. So the challenge at that time was, none of us could follow the model of global companies. Because if I want to say, am I running this company well? I'd say, okay, so what's my salary cost as a percentage of total costs? What's my communications as a percentage of total costs? Now, these ratios were very different for Accenture or IBM than they were for us. So how do I know I'm doing well? So we used to get together and share information. We used to teach and learn from each other. And I remember in that time that, for example, I'd focused in the UK and set up something very successful there. My friend Ashank Desai or Mastech was doing that in Singapore. It was no issue at all for Ashank to call me up and say, look, if you guys are in the UK, can you answer some of these questions? What do you do for visas? Who's a good lawyer? Whatever. What would you charge? And I could easily call up Ashank and say, listen, tell me a bit about Singapore. We're looking to do something there. Raj Pawar at NIIT, he had a client who wanted, to whom Raji had sold that we can do software development remotely from here. We'll connect to your IT infrastructure and we'll write code from here. And the guy said, I don't think this can be done. Now, I had done it for a client in the UK. And I remember Raji calling me saying, listen, I'm going to bring this client and I'm going to show him because this is what I need to do. But you need to tell me, you need to promise me that none of your guys are going to give them their visiting cards. Nobody's going to poach this client. So we learn a lot from each other. So NASSCOM was very seminal, I think, in getting the policy framework we needed. And actually, it made a huge difference. People say government had we did well because government wasn't involved. It's actually not true. We did very well because government did step up and really help us with the right kind of policy framework, which including 100% tax exemption for a while. So they were very helpful. Allows us a band together, build a brand. We learned from each other because we had nowhere else to go. And that is why today, even at 250 billion, we are such a close-knit industry. Now we compete fiercely with all the companies compete fiercely. In those days when you're $50 million, all of your business could come from one floor in one building in Manhattan. So you weren't really competing with each other. You could all find different customers. But when you're 10 and 20 and 30, $40 billion, you are competing. There is fierce competition. But when you would see us at a NASSCOM Executive Council meeting or at a board offsite, which we're doing in Goa, for example, next month, you wouldn't know. You would think we are all brothers close together, that there's no competition, the kind of sharing. So I think NASSCOM has been very, very similar. And I feel so privileged that one had the opportunity to build it. I mean, if it existed, we wouldn't have had anything to do. But building it was great. And in this industry, what enthused us a lot was, remember, we're talking of the 80s. India was a loser country at that time. We had a terrible brand. We couldn't export anything that people thought was fit to use. So getting into software for the developed market was really like carrying coals to Newcastle. So for us, it was really a mission, saying, we've got to prove that this works. And I think in the process, we ended up kind of building the brand of New India. I mean, that's not what we started to do. We were just trying to build our companies and find a way to grow them, find a way to band together. So it's not as if, we had imagined all these grand things, but they sort of came one after another. And the more there was this positive feedback, the more we got encouraged to, go and do the next step.
And I must say, Saurabh, I'm extremely grateful to you for that, because you kind of set up an identity for us who followed in your footsteps later on in the IT industry, that you gave us that brand recognition almost to the point that I recall Arjun and I were in Japan. We had gone to actually Kyoto, and we were at a small, just a small little place outside of Kyoto. And there was an elder Japanese man who was manning the door. He was the doorman there at the hotel. And he looked at both of us, he bowed, and he says, "Indian, IT, IT, IT." And, both of us said, wow, that is a phenomenal thing, that how we as Indians are being recognized
Puneet,
globally. So
Puneet,
really,
this happened to my friend Harish Mehta, who's a co-founder of NASSCOM with me.
Yes.
He got onto a cab in New York, and they started chatting on the way. And he asked Harish, and Harish told him, IT industry. So he told Harish that, actually, I don't want to take any money from you. Because of you, my status has gone up. And Harish said, how come? He says, now I can tell all my customers that I'm actually getting into the IT industry. I'm just driving a cab to make some money.
Indeed. So the second part of that, Saurabh, is really that TiE, the idea of TiE, of helping other entrepreneurs. You obviously by then, all of you had become very successful. You recognize the need to support others. So walk us through that early years of TiE, formation of TiE, how you moved the whole idea, developed it, and then really propagated it globally. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say just like NASSCOM is kind of part of my blood, because I think I almost enjoyed creating NASSCOM more than I enjoyed creating my company, because it's just that, these peer level institutions are just very hard to create. In the company, at least, the lines of command are well known. Who owns the maximum shares, who's the CEO. Now in NASSCOM, when I was chairman of NASSCOM, I mean, the only power you have is what your peers are willing to give you. Otherwise, you have no authority. I mean, sitting on the same table would be Narayana Murthy of Infosys, or Mr. Kohli, who headed TCS, and these were all big players. So that taught me a lot about how you handle people, how you handle peers, people who are doing something much bigger than you, and all the rest, and to still be able to lead them, and for them to let you lead them. So that learning helped a lot. And in some ways, I would say indirectly, we kind of helped in the creation of TiE in Silicon Valley, because and Kanwal tells his story better than I do. Is on one of these software India seminars, we were there. The Secretary Government of India was with us. We were on the East Coast, and we were flying to the West Coast, and we had set up to meet some of these guys, Kanwal and all the rest, because we were sort of trying to grab all non-resident Indians who were doing well and wanting them to spread our brand. We missed the flight, but these guys met anyway. And then they realized that they actually who lived in the valley, but they hadn't actually been meeting each other. There weren't very many of them at that time.
Right.
Today, it's all over the place, but there were very few really successful entrepreneurs who were Indian. And so they decided to meet again. And once they had dinner 2 or 3 times, they said, look, we need to have a purpose. And then they thought, look, we've been successful. Why don't we encourage other people from this part of the world to be entrepreneurs? And they called that meeting. That was, you may say, the start of TiE. They thought a handful of people would show up, few hundred showed up. And that's how TiE Silicon Valley got born. So I didn't create it, but I think by accident, when I had a hand in it. And because of that, I was very, very close to TiE in Silicon Valley, long before TiE Global came into being.
Yes.
So, I mean, my business would take me there 4 or 5 times a year. We acquired a company, so I was living 6 months a year in Silicon Valley, 6 months here. I was at every event, every single TiECon, whatever. So I was very, very close to them. And I just loved what they were able to do. So if you look at TiE, what is it? Indians are what? 1 to 2% of the population, 10% of the millionaires, more than a third of all startups in Silicon Valley have people like you, somebody Indian as a founder. So they changed that phase. And so one thought that this is what we need in India. Because when I did my startup, it was very hard. There were no mentors. There was no angel investing. There was no venture capital. Here we had a company, Puneet, growing at profitable from the first year, growing at 70% a year. Nobody was willing to put in capital. There was no VC money, nothing. So this piece became very central to saying, look, now that you've been lucky and had some success with doing startups, why not try and get the entrepreneurial side and the VC industry going? And you talked about Infinity. And that's really how this idea was born, saying, okay, I had done one exit. So now for a change, I had capital, because when we started the company, we really had no real money. I think it was maybe $5,000 or $10,000 is all we had to start it. But now we had some serious capital. So we said, let's do a VC fund. And we did it NASSCOM style. I got 10 of friends into my boardroom. And I said, here's a plan. Why don't we do Infinity? Each of us will put in a small sum of money. I think at that time was a few $100,000 each. Then we'll go the rest of the money. And guess what? Where did the rest of the money come? It came from TiE.
And who were the people, Saurabh? So I know you were there, Arun was there.
So there were 10 of us. There was me, Harish Mehta, Arun Seth, PG, Gaurav Dalmia, Praveen Gandhi. Right. So we had 10 of us. And then Praveen Gandhi, Gaurav Dalmia, and myself, we sort of became the 3 who became, you might say, the real GPs. So we ran it.
Right.
And the others helped a lot by spending time on boards and all the rest of it. So they were like, you may say, semi-GPs. It wasn't a classical model. And you know what, on fundraising, you would be amazed how easy it was. I went to Silicon Valley. Kanwal hosted a dinner. So there were 20, 30 people there. And he said, look, Saurabh's here. He's raising this fund, Infinity. I'm going to put in $1 million, guys. Let me go around the table. That's how it happened. And I remember B.V. Jagdish said $250,000 or something, or whatever, or maybe $500,000. And Kanwal said, no. You just made so much money from Exodus.
I know.
$1 million. $1 million. So that's how the whole money, a large part of the money just got raised from the TiE network. Suhas Patil, lots of these. Almost everybody you think of that time,
right,
got into Infinity. And that's how, and it was in the private sector, that was the first VC fund anybody was creating here. So we were very fortunate. We just got it raised. Most of it was an email. I remember I got an email from Silicon Valley Bank, which said, listen, many of our customers here have asked us to invest in your fund. So send us your bank details. We never even spoke to them. They just, put some money in the fund. This was Silicon Valley bank from California, because they hadn't started in India at the time.
Yes.
And I remember another guy, Ed Sher, who was the first investor in Kanwal's startup. So, and he did very well. And so he told Kanwal, okay, henceforth, whatever you do, whenever you're investing, I have a right of first refusal. You got to ask me. And Kanwal spoke to him. And he said, that's fine. And all we did is we got a mail from Ed Shear's office asking for our bank details. And he just wired $1 million. Now, this is 1999. The total amount of VC money coming into India was less than $1 billion, which included Warburg Pincus and all the rest, right?
Right.
So $1 million was a big ticket, at that time. Because to give you an idea of what the investments were, we put in, I think, $1 million or $2 million maybe. And we own 21% of India Books. Our vendors, our check was $400,000. So those days, you didn't need that. You weren't writing such big checks. So Infinity also happened as a bit like NASSCOM, kind of a peer group, having fun. It wasn't a classical VC fund. I remember when we were doing the documentation, Praveen and I had both been entrepreneurs. So naturally, we founded companies with very little money, got huge returns, 1,000, 5,000x. So where it said rejected IRR, we put 100%. When we took that PPM to the US, and lawyer who vetted it, he looked at us and he said, guys, are you for real? You're doing a VC fund, you're putting 100%, you want to get sued? So we had to, he said, no, you don't put stuff like that. Just high 20s, you don't talk about 100% IRR. And we were very glad we did that. We didn't do 100% IRR.
So Saurabh, then of course you set up TiE Delhi. You were instrumental in setting that up, and of course now TiE Delhi is after Silicon Valley the largest TiE chapter amongst the 60 chapters that we have there. And one thing that TiE Delhi that I'm always amazed at is how you've been able to recruit such a deep bench of leadership in TiE Delhi. You've got the who's who in terms of TiE Delhi, the leadership, etc. Different presidents that you've got, and I'll be remiss, and I know I will miss a few, but just to take a few names, people like Sanjeev Bikhchandani or Deep Kalra or Rajan, and all that. Now there have been many there. So how did you manage to do that? Because this is a tough thing. These are all prima donnas. They're very successful. They're very busy, but that is something that you built, and love to hear how did you do that.
Puneet, actually, I would say there's a lot of learning I got from NASSCOM. That wasn't easy, I can tell you. It was very hard to get people on board. It wasn't easy. So there was a lot of learning on how one has to handle this. Because see, at the end of the day, what you learned, that if you're building an institution, a peer group, then if people see it as your play, then you're not going to succeed. I mean, you need to have a big enough vision that excites other people. And now many of them may be bigger than you. You have to accept that. Bigger brands, more wealthy, whatever, may have built bigger companies. But you want to act for them to join you. So it has to be a big brand. Secondly, the most important part, I feel, is you must share ownership. In a company, it's easy. You give shares. How do you share ownership in something like NASSCOM, right, or TiE? The only way you share ownership is they must believe it's also their vision. So you kind of, how should I put it? You have to seduce them to saying, look, this is our vision. And then it's also important not to get very upset when a lot of people claim it is their vision. I mean, take NASSCOM. Only 4 of us founded it. Every other day I meet somebody who says he's a co-founder in NASSCOM. Now, it's okay. You have to be clear saying you should be happy that other people want to associate with the brand. It really shouldn't bother you. So just around the time one was doing TiE, that was a very eventful period. That 99, 2000, 2001. we'd got the venture fund going and we were investing. And then we had the same problem in VC as we had in the software industry. Government policies were not tuned for it. So as an LP, you got taxed twice. There was no tax pass-through.
Right.
So again, so what I did again is this time create the Indian Venture Capital Association. And again, we were very few numbers, but it helped. And by 2001, we got some of that legislation. And the same time is when we said, let's actually open a chapter in India. Now, action had been happening because the Silicon Valley guys, Kanwal was the ringleader, were doing phenomenal work in India. What they would do is they would come and we would try and meet government and change policies. And they were big names. All of us in India, we were just starting out. So we were, none of us was big names. I told you, even Murthy was, there was a $500,000 company, right? So we were not big names. These names were all visible. So they had more authority. So we would take them and actually get them to meet the government. So they were doing all that. And then we said, look, why don't we create a TiE chapter? And I can tell you the support we got. You know, every other month, we'd get 10, 20 people turn up from there. We would do events. You know, our TiEcons became places where we attracted anybody and everybody. You know, friend C.K. Prahlad, he came and gave some of his best talks there, got into arguments with senior government officials on what could be done, couldn't be done. When President Abdul Kalam was there, he hosted the entire TiEcon attendance team, a few hundred of us, down in Rashtrapati Bhavan. So they helped us create TiE Delhi, honestly, you know. But it was a challenge too, because getting the first few charter members, that was a challenge. And you were asking.
And sorry to interrupt you, Saurabh, but I definitely want to plug that for many of our members here who may not have read The House of TiE, which you and a bunch of all of you helped actually C.K. Prahlad put it down for us at TiE. I would say definitely, you know, it is still guides us. The very ethos of TiE about us being a net giver organization and about having impact, you know, is something that you all developed the blueprint.
Yeah, I think that happened, Puneet, when, so there was only TiE Silicon Valley at the time. Right. And then there was a decision to say, when we did our chapters here in Delhi, for example, and Harish and Bombay, we said, okay, now there should be a TiE Global. So Silicon Valley was transferring the brand to TiE Global. And I served on the first two TiE Global boards.
Yes.
And they were great boards. You had C.K. Prahlad and Kanwal and
I think Suhas was there.
Rajat, Suhas,
right.
Lots of people, yeah. Punendu Chatterjee, we had very great boards. And that is when C.K. Prahlad said, okay, I'm going to come out with this document. And the learning we had in TiE Delhi was, at least my learning in NASSCOM and IVCA said, I must get the best people on board. But remember, in 99, 98, we didn't have a lot of successful entrepreneurs in India. So you had to pull whoever you could. So I pulled a lot of people out of NASSCOM, Sanjeev, Deep. They were all starting out at that time. They all became a part of it. And we had to diversify a little bit because TiE in Silicon Valley was all tech.
Yes.
Delhi was not tech in 2000. Now it is. In fact, the latest study says that NCR is bigger than Bangalore in the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem, but not there. So we said, no, we must also do retail. We must do A or B or C. And it was kind of forced because 2001 was a tech bubble burst. So everything fell off a cliff.
.com.
Yeah, the .com burst. And we thought TiE Delhi might just cease to exist. So we kind of reinvented the model, saying, hey, no, this is about entrepreneurship. It's not about tech. So, and we got a lot of help from Silicon Valley. I think if we are where we are today, I think there are two things. One is a lot of help from Silicon Valley in the earlier years. And the board we were able to put together was very, very collaborative, very supportive. Just like me doing things when, we doing IVCA and NASSCOM and all that when I started doing my startup. The kind of work Sanjeev and Deep did with TiE when they were doing their startups. It was absolutely fantastic. So we had very good people. And yes, it was a challenge to get Sanjeev and Deep and Pramod Bhasin and Rajan and all that to come and head TiE. So one had to seduce them. And they all said they were very busy, very hard. But I'll tell you this, every single one of them, and Pramod Bhasin incident, every single one of them, when they took on the mantle, gave it everything.
Yes, yeah.
Really, they gave it absolutely everything. Yeah, I forgot PG's name also. He was.
Correct.
And I'll tell you the one thing with Rajan. So with Rajan, at NASSCOM, we thought we should get one of the new age guys to be chairman of NASSCOM. So I talked to NASSCOM and said, Rajan, why don't you become chairman of NASSCOM? We'd like you to become chairman of NASSCOM. Of course, you have to go through the election process, but we'd like to get in the queue. And he said, Saurabh, I am so busy. You would not believe I won't be able to give enough to it. So I'm really honored, but I must decline. Because we have a process where the former chairman of, past chairman of NASSCOM have a chairman's council. And
right.
One of our jobs is to try and, help select the next chairman. So we do all this work. And so I told everybody, I said, look, I've tried. He says he can't do it. Then came a few months later was the TiE issue. Because now Pramod was stepping off. And so I called Rajan back. And I said, Rajan, again, I have a request. This is not NASSCOM. Now, this is TiE. He said, Saurabh, we just had this discussion. And I said, yeah, but that's what's for NASSCOM. This is very meaningful. NASSCOM, somebody else can be chairman. It's a big organization, it's okay. But TiE, this is very central. Long chat. Then he said, okay, Saurabh, I can't say no to you twice in 3 months. And he came on board. But Puneet, I would tell you, he's been one of the best presidents we've had. I mean, he gave it absolutely everything.
Indeed.
Very, very fortunate.
And sort of around that time is when you came to Singapore, around 2000.
2000, yes. Yeah.
That's when we chapter here. And tell us about that.
Yeah. So that's, Puneet, that's when we said, okay, we'll do this TiE Global. And now we'll do more chapters. So whole group, I was one of the team. Kanwal was certainly one of them. So a group of us descended in Singapore. And as you said, there was Inderjeet Singh and of course,
Karan was there, Satpal was there.
Karan, of course. Yeah. So we came there and the idea was, say, we must have a chapter in Singapore because Singapore is, a country, but this will flourish. It should flourish. It's so central. And we got hosted to a lunch by Singapore government. And we were very surprised. We were not expecting it. We hadn't really planned for it, but we felt very, very honored. And Madam Ho Ching was there. The chairman of Singapore Airlines was there. I think even the president of Singapore was there, if I remember. So it was a very nice time. And they were all very keen for us to set up TiE in Singapore. Very supportive. But a couple of messages. One message came loud and clear. We were told in not so many words, but clearly saying, hey, don't restrict this to people of Indian origin only. This should be TiE Singapore. So it should be everybody in Singapore, which in any case was plan. So that wasn't an issue. And then the other thing was a very interesting discussion. We talked about India, we talked about Singapore. And there was kind of a thread which ran, which said, look, in India, now we talked about 2020 years ago. They said, in India, the thing is, it's very hard to do business. There's roadblock everywhere that you go. And so in some ways, you have no choice but to become innovative. And you have no choice but to become entrepreneurs because there are not so many jobs around. So actually, the difficulties are helping create this opportunity. And in Singapore, maybe the government has done too good a job. Everything is easy. So why should somebody take the risk? Why should they become entrepreneurs? And so maybe things should be made a little bit more difficult in Singapore. It's very interesting. This was conversation at the lunch table between some of us from India, some of the guys from Silicon Valley, and people from Singapore. I mean, I still remember that lunch. It was a great lunch, and see what's happened. I mean, you've got such a great chapter in Singapore today. Which you yourself and others have built. But it was a really, really interesting trip. We had a whole bunch of meetings, and I know we had a big launch. I forget where we did it, but it was quite a big launch. A lot of people were there.
We have just recently been awarded the TiE Global Summit, Saurabh. So we're going to host that next year in
Fantastic.
2023. TiE Delhi was the first one that hosted the TiE Global Summit. In fact, he hosted it twice in a row.
Yeah.
We've been awarded that. And one of the things we think we really see, even though Singapore has been the one that is a recipient of that, we really want it to be actually a play of this entire part of the world. So we want to actually involve Hong Kong, we want to involve a chapter in Tokyo, we want to involve our chapters in Australia. So really make it an inclusive, this thing, for this real part, for this whole part of the world, because in a tech-centric thing, which started in Silicon Valley in Europe and India, we moved that way, but we do want people to get more exposed to this part. And we think that this is a very thriving ecosystem, big economic power, resides here. So we want to do that. And we would love for you to come and, be one of our keynote speakers at the TiE Global Summit. So we will extend that invitation.
I think TGS it's a great opportunity. And I think you're doing exactly the right thing, because the flavor you can bring to it in Singapore wouldn't be possible anywhere else, because you're absolutely surrounded by countries that are very deep into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And there is so much happening in that whole area. And it's not exactly what's happening in the West necessarily.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I think it would be absolutely an excellent thing to do. So TiE, I think if I look at it, like I said, so NASSCOM is like one thing very close to my heart. It kind of defines me. The other thing really is TiE, because I think it has been central to what has happened in India. See, if you look at it in India, Puneet, in 1999-2000, when we did Infinity, it was very hard to find good investment opportunities. And the only one you found was somebody doing one more IT service company. There was nothing, no flavor. That's how we ended up doing things like India Bulls and Avendus. And they also had very different models. Avendus was going to be the Charles Schwab. Sorry, Avendus was going to be garage.com. And they were called coolstartups.com. The model didn't work. And then we sat with them and we switched it to saying, become a technology investment bank. We're all from the tech industry. We'll get you some business. And you need to have a name which sounds very corporate. That's how Avendus came. India Bulls was going to be Charles Schwab, but there was no internet penetration in India. And so they went into a different direction. And so that's why post-Infinity, I felt that, what we were missing was an angel ecosystem. Because if you look at the US in a typical year, VCs early stage, put about $25 billion in about 5,000 companies. But angels put about the same amount, maybe $1 billion more, in 50,000 companies. So they create the nursery for the VCs. In India, we didn't have that. So that's how the Indian Angel Network was born, because we said, look, we need to have an angel ecosystem. So again, just like all the others, Puneet, started like a semi-hobby. There's half a dozen of us met over a drink and said, let's do it. So we created Angel IAN. But I think because, you know, if it's an idea whose time has come, it happens. So I think the timing was right. We looked at models in the US and elsewhere, copied some of them, improved on some of them, and then it just slowly grew. And within a year or so, we were past 50 or 60. And then we thought, okay, this thing has legs. And so then we did it more formally. And of course, now it's, and when we started in 2006, we used to struggle to find 200 companies to look at, and hard to find even one or two that were investable. Last year, we saw about 8,000 or 9,000 companies. And now you're doing an investment every fortnight. This is what's happened to the Indian startup ecosystem. It just ballooned. And I can tell you, TiE has had a big role in it, absolutely a big role. Sure, building an angel ecosystem, then a VC ecosystem. I mean, from $1 billion in 2000, last year was 60 billion. I mean, Indian companies now, in the last 5 years, there have been many years when Indian companies have raised more money from VC and PE than they've raised from capital markets. You know, so
we can clearly see that, Saurabh. You have spent over 20 years, really, you know, you know, the question is, why have you spent so much time? Why is it critical to have spent so much time in that space? What drove you to do that? What are you thinking? How do you see this thing growing?
See, let me put it another way. I think if you look at India, the big problem we have, there are two answers to that. One is India-centric. So if you look at India, and maybe it scales, it also applies to other countries. The single biggest challenge we have is to create 10 million jobs a year. That's what we need to create. You look at global data. You know, there's the Kaufman study, which they did over 40 years in the US. And it said, except for 7 years in between, 33 out of the 40 net new job growth only came from startups. Not from large corporates, not even from government. It came from startups. Now, if you look at India, if we have to do those jobs, where are they going to come from? Not from large companies, not from government. It'll have to be startups. So it's the single most valuable thing you can do is to do whatever you can create an ecosystem where there are more startups. But the second is not just that startups create jobs. The fact is, for a startup to succeed, it has to do something innovative. I mean, you're competing with established players. If you're not doing something innovative, if you're not doing something different, if you're not doing something differently, you're not going to win. So you do something innovative. And so in India, if you look at it, our big challenges, you know, affordable healthcare, distance education. We have only a third as many teachers as we need. We have the lowest agricultural productivity in the world, agri-tech. If you look at environment, if you look at all these areas, challenges. But for startups, these are opportunities on scale. And today, you have startups that are becoming unicorns in these spaces. They're solving a problem that government couldn't solve, big companies couldn't solve, and startups are solving them. They're becoming unicorns in this area. So actually, from an India viewpoint, if I was to say, okay, what contribution can I do? This is the best thing one could do, to do anything which creates more startups. Now, that's true globally also. It's not just us. Look at Israel. I mean, it's sitting in such a difficult neighborhood. It's the only developed country there. It has population which is less than the city of Delhi. And look where they are. It's pure entrepreneurship. Look at the US. I mean, the big companies today didn't exist. You know,
Yes.
There used to be General Motors and Ford. Now there's a different set of people. So I think, and the other piece about entrepreneurship, which I love, is look, God is the one person who we know creates something out of nothing. But the only other person who can do that is an entrepreneur. Because, you know, when you create a company, it's a living entity. The law recognizes it as an entity. You know, it's born, it has joys, it has pains, it grows, and it dies. There's a nice Harvard Business Review article which says, must all companies die? The fact is, sooner or later they do. So that's the other piece which is very appealing. You're creating something out of nothing. It didn't exist. So, you know, joy can never go out of it.
Now, clearly, Saurabh, I mean, you have led from the front, you have, you know, provided, and you've always emphasized the nobility of that pursuit. There are many things to do, but creating a startup, creating entrepreneurship perhaps is amongst one of the most noblest of things that one can do, you know. And of course, we all take a lot of inspiration from what you have done, what you have continuing to do. And if I see your journey, and I'm just mindful of the time here, you know, I see that you have taken in the first, if I were to do the Kal Chakra and look at how Gartner defines in 4 quadrants, or how even our own Hindu philosophy divides life in 4 quadrants. So in your life, there was corporate in first quadrant, entrepreneur in the second quadrant, institution builder in the third quadrant. What is the 4th quadrant now? What are you thinking next?
Right. Let me put it another way. 4th quadrant, so I'm in Q4 of my life. So if you believe Hindu philosophy, there will be another Q1, but not in this life. So in this life, in Q4, and a lot of people sort of say to themselves, okay, now I'm done, now I retire, I take it easy. But if you're running a company, Q4 is not when you take it easy. That is the last chance to actually make sure you have a positive balance sheet. So, you know, so when you are up for judgment, you should have given more than you got, or at least whatever you did get, you added more value to it. That's kind of important. So, and I'm kind of not saying it just from a noble type viewpoint. It's just that to have, you need to have a sense of purpose in life for life to be interesting. You know, for you to wake up every morning and want to do stuff, there has to be a purpose. It can't be just about, I'll make a little more money or I'll do one more good trade. There has to be some purpose. So it's very selfish to have a sense of purpose that you think is useful, that you think is worthwhile. So it may look like I've done all these things. Well, one is I've been around much longer than you have. So you have a lot more time to do things. The second part is, it's not that I had a grand plan or vision. You know, Puneet, I kind of did things as they came because they seemed like the right things to do at that time. And I think it's still so, it was a privilege to have had the opportunity, because in India, you could still create these things. They didn't exist. Now, if I was living in the US, where would I do this? There was no, you know, these were all done. So I wouldn't have had the opportunity. And then to that extent, maybe I would have grown a bit less. Because the more you do, the more you grow. And right now, I think engaging with entrepreneurs is the most the most satisfying mental activity that you can do, because you know you are learning about new industries every day, different ways of doing things. So much as all of us give some gyan, there's a lot we're learning every day. So you know you can never get bored, you can never get tired. So from that viewpoint also, this is probably one of the best retirement plans. You know, you can engage as much as you like or as little as you like.
No, Saurabh, you are powering through these quadrants. And I have a very, very strong suspicion that Q4 is going to be powering through, perhaps even more so than what you have done in Q1, Q2, Q3.
You should give me ideas right now.
Yes.
I'm crowdsourcing ideas for what I should do in Q4.
Well, you do so many things. I know one of the things that you have done, of course, you have done many corporate successes, and we talked about things, your own ventures, corporate thing that you did, including what people like India Bulls and all that. But just even, I know you sit on the board of governors of IIT Kanpur, and you actually have a incubator out there, and you do, esoteric stuff there to help humanity. Whether, I know we talked about last year, in the middle of the pandemic, that you were actually helping out developing ICU grade, ventilators, which were the need of the hour. And now when we're talking about ecological sustenance and all that, you're talking about a very interesting, venture. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit about Pool and let our audience know here what that is. Because to me, a thinker is multi-dimensional, and you do these things in so many different ways. These are not just adjacencies that has incremental improvement, but you are, making such dramatic changes in so many different fields, and we all have to learn so much from that.
So I think IIT Kanpur actually has got a very good incubator, and I think IITs should focus on this very much. And I think I got interested because they had a number of companies that were doing something very unusual. I mean, the one you talked about on ventilators was a company called Noka. And they actually were in a different business. They had developed a robotic waterless solar panel cleaner. So they were competing with a company in Israel. They built that product. But what happened was, just as about they were getting ready to take it to market, we had COVID. There was a lockdown, and demand for it disappeared overnight. And the factory was locked because all factories were locked. And the only way government would allow you to open is if you were doing something related to COVID. And that's when this idea of the ventilator came up. These guys, both of them, very good engineers. They thought they could do it. So they designed it, they built it, and we all got together between IIT and myself, and we created a task force, about 15, 20 people, which included people from the manufacturing industry, medtech industry, healthcare, from here, from the US, a lot of alumni of IIT Kanpur. And in about 95 days, it was designed, developed, manufactured, and it was in a hospital. And now the company has changed. It's now a medtech company. It's an IT company. Now they have a range of products, and it will end up being a very successful company. Complete pivot in 100 days. And it was a very different model of doing the pivot. And there's this other one which I really love. So we have so many temples, and all these flowers are thrown into the rivers. And flowers, as you know, don't biodegrade. It's not like a leaf. So they're toxic. What they do is take all this temple waste and some agri-tech waste, which causes Delhi pollution. And from there, they create charcoal-free, alcohol-free incense and a bunch of different products, personal care products out of that. And they create artificial leather, which is at 1/4 the cost and time of real leather, same properties, right? And there again, they're doing exceedingly well, and they're being chased now by these global brands, because the flavor of the day is to have a healthy alternative. So they stand out. I mean, there are lots of great companies, but these stand out because they're doing something that's very unusual. Because you look at startups in India or anywhere, very few VCs invest in manufacturing companies.
Indeed.
And so it was a bit of a stretch to do both these companies. Even in our own IC, there are members who said, hey, you're not going to make a big multiple on a manufacturing company. But guess what? We might make the best multiples in these two.
No, absolutely. Saurabh, I'm conscious of the time here. I could go on and speak for a long time, but really, I'm reading some of the comments that are coming in. I go away with a sense of deep gratitude, frankly, but for people like you, we would not have gotten the opportunity because you help build platforms where many of us, a lot of people signed in here. In fact, all the people signed in here, at least have one common affiliation, which is TiE. And we have been able to give back because of people like yourselves, visionaries like yourself, who helped build that platform so we could actually come onto that platform and give back. I know I didn't talk about the humanitarian venture that you and your wife run. You help the girl child, helping these young girls, get educated. So there is the philanthropist in you, there is the visionary in you, there is the power or a venture builder in you. Really, in so many ways, I have a deep sense of gratitude, and I express from all of us over here. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for mentoring us. Thank you for guiding us. And really, we continue to look forward to your counsel, to your guidance, to your mentorship. Thank you for really being for us, and we look forward as soon as this COVID situation or imposed travel restriction lifts, that we could actually have this and then go out and have a glass of wine with everybody around and have it in person. But
Puneet,
really, thank you so much once again.
You're indeed very, very kind, very generous with your words. I don't think I deserve any of that.
No, you're humble to the core.
You're doing. And it's just a pleasure for me to be with you guys for this event. And yes, in person would be a lot better. Singapore is one of my favorite places. So soon as we can, we should do that.
Indeed, really looking forward to that. We thought we'd have question and answers, Q&A, and I've overrun on time. I've done a bad job of time management here, but it was just so interesting. I just did not have a way to cut it, or interrupt you. I was learning so much, even having time.
I think, let me put it another way. I think my wife keeps telling me that I talk too much. Maybe that's what I was doing today.
Well, you can only talk so much if we have content to deliver, and this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you very much. Really much privileged to have you amongst us and to continue to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Puneet.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Puneet. Thanks for a wonderful session. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. We will, if you have questions, please send it to Sudha. And, I apologize, we've run out of time, but we will get Saurabh to answer those questions that you have. And again, Saurabh's contact information can be shared with all of you. He's very generous. Please write to him, and he'd be happy to answer those questions even one-on-one. Thank you very much. Thanks, Saurabh.
Thanks.
Wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.